Mark Skaar on the Skaar Kaard on 103.7 The Fox. Proud to welcome in author Robert Lawson to talk about Wheatfield Empire, the listener's guide to the Guess Who. Robert, thanks for joining us. You, of course, have two previous books available from Nazareth and Cheap Trick perspectives. This time, the Guess Who, and of course, we should tell our listeners that you reside in Canada.
I do. I am Canadian, and I've lived in Canada for most of my life.
So I would imagine that probably you were a fan of the Guess Who growing up?
Yeah, I was born and raised in Winnipeg, which is where they're from, so it's sort of ingrained in you out there. But all of Canada has always been a huge market for the Guess Who. You know, I grew up in the 70s when they were really big up here, and then, of course, Burton Cummings and Randy Bachman both went on to have really successful solo careers up here as well.
This book kind of takes us back to pre-Guess Who, and I guess the first big single they had was Shakin' All Over about 1965, and they hit the ground running, and at least here in the States had a good 8-9 year run, and maybe a lot of people don't know, but after all those hits, they kept going.
Yeah, the Guess Who, they sort of start... It's a little iffy. A lot of bands don't have a kind of a nebulous beginning like the Guess Who, because they started as a different band and then they slowly sort of morphed into the Guess Who. But by the time you have what most people consider the classic lineup of Burton Cummings, Randy Bachman, Jim Cale, and Gary Peterson, we're talking like 1968. The band broke up in 75. So in that run, you've got about 12 or 13 albums. So lots of albums, lots of singles, played on the radio, lots of touring. They were a really busy band for that time frame.
Talking with author Robert Lawson about Wheatfield Empire, the listener's guide to the Guess Who. And I'm a passive fan of the Guess Who, I would say. I learned a lot reading this book. And you forget, Robert, that Randy Bachman was left or fired, however you want to look at it, in 1970. And they had a lot of history after that.
That's an interesting point that I'm seeing more and more on social media, that a lot of people look back at the Guess Who as kind of these two main guys, which were Burton Cummings and Randy. But you're absolutely correct. Randy was let go in early 1970. So there's a whole bunch of albums and a whole bunch of songs that were hits and that still get played on classic rock radio that Randy had nothing to do with. And it seems like a lot of people, when they hear Share the Land or Rain Dance and Albert Flasher and Clap for the Wolfman and Running Back to Saskatoon, Glamour Boy, you know, all these pretty big hits, and you'll find them on almost any Guess Who Greatest Hits album. But yeah, Randy had nothing to do with any of those songs. He got out early.
Mm-hmm. Yep, Star Baby would have been one of the later ones.
That's right, sure.
Mm-hmm. And of course, as any group that has the history of the Guess Who, 55 years, you got people coming and going all the time, and they've all kind of been in and out, and I don't know if there's been any real constant, but the band does continue to this day with one original member.
That's true. It's a bit of a bone of contention for a lot of people. The band, for a long time now, has toured with only the original drummer. And some people think that's inappropriate. I'm probably one of them, because I don't think people in the States, especially, when they see the name The Guess Who, they don't necessarily know that they're not getting basically Burton Cummings on vocals, the voice on all those hits. So I think if they renamed or rebranded themselves somehow, it would take a little bit of the sting away. But it is odd to see music videos or live footage of all these young kind of guys with like long blonde hair kind of headbanging along to these like Guess Who songs. And actually Rudy Sarzo's on bass in the Guess Who these days,
right?
Which is really kind of shocking to me. And I love Rudy Sarzo. I was a big fan of his in the 80s, and I just don't see him as being in the Guess Who and vice versa. But here we are.
Talking with Robert Lawson about Wheatfield Empire, the listener's guide to the Guess Who. And of course, the cool thing is you were able to involve Burton Cummings in a lot of this book and weave him in and out, and he's obviously a central piece. Burton
was totally open to it. When I pitched him the project, he got involved right away and was just totally open to me throughout the whole thing. So I was able to get a hold of him anytime that I had any questions. And there's other band members and that I spoke to. There's also kind of some guys on the sides, perhaps we'd say, of Guess Who history that I was able to interview. So that's definitely a change from my previous books, where I tried to keep band members at arm's length because I didn't kind of want to get too close to them, except for Bunny Carlos with my Cheap Trick book. Aside from him, I didn't want to get too close to some of those guys just because I thought they might influence the kind of stuff that I would write about.
Because Bunny is basically the band historian, even though he's not touring with the band anymore. Speaking of bones of contention, but we'll leave that be. What's your favorite Guess Who record?
I get asked that a lot, and it's really hard to say. I really don't think from Wheatfield Soul in 1969 to Power in the Music in 75 that they have a bad album. Every album has a couple of radio singles. They all have some interesting, kind of weird songs, and then they'll have some great deep cuts. But if you get a hold of the Live at the Paramount on Buddha Records, it's a CD reissue, but they added a whole bunch of bonus songs on it that were never on the original album. That's a real good look at what the band was like as a live unit in the early 70s. But aside from that, the American Woman album's a 10 out of 10. I like Artificial Paradise from 1973 a lot. But Road Food is great, number 10. You really can't go wrong, but I would advise people to not just stick with a greatest hits album. A greatest hits or a best of compilation is great to just get those radio hits, but the Guess Who's catalog is about so much more than just radio hits, in my opinion.
Talking with author Robert Lawson about Wheatfield Empire, the listener's guide to the Guess Who, and I guess this is kind of the first exhaustive look at the Guess Who from a book standpoint. This is a hole and a niche that needed to be filled, huh?
Yeah, well, that's how I looked at it, and that's kind of how I look at all my books. When I got the idea of doing a book about Nazareth 5 or 6 years ago, part of the reason was because I realized that there is no books about Nazareth out there. And Cheap Trick was similar. My friend Mike Hayes wrote a great book, but it had been out of print for a long time. And the Guess Who are the exact same situation. There is a book called American Woman, The Story of the Guess Who by John Einerson, who's kind of a music historian up here. And he's written books about Ian and Sylvia and Neil Young and all kinds of people. But his book came out in like 96 or 97, and it's been out of print for quite a while too. So whereas his book stops in the mid-90s, mine goes all the way to like last summer, I think, or the summer before. So it's a lot more in-depth, and I've been able to cover a lot of stuff that's happened since then.
Yeah, you mentioned the reissues, and of course, there's tons of them with a band with the lineage that the Guess Who has, and some of them are better quality than others, and there's some things that you question why they exist, but they're not available for some reason, and I'm sure the Guess Who catalog is riddled with that kind of problematic situation at times.
Well, there's a great label in the States called Iconoclastic. So a few years ago, they started reissuing Guess Who albums on CD, and they would add bonus tracks and liner notes, and they did a really great job. But the weird thing was Iconoclastic doesn't have a Canadian distributor. So, I manage a record store in Toronto here, and you've got this label in the States doing these great Guess Who reissues, and we can't get them up here. I'd have customers ask me for them, and it sounds weird to say, yeah, sorry, they're not available in Canada, even though they're reissues of Canada's first international superstars, but that's just how it was, so even myself, as someone who manages a record store, I'd have to order those directly from the label. The labels up here in Canada don't seem to treat or think that the Guess Who catalog deserves the treatment that this label in the States did.
We're talking with Robert Lawson, the author of Wheatfield Empire, the listener's guide to the Guess Who, and I know last summer I had tickets to see Randy and Burton together. Of course, the virus crushed that. Looks like they've rescheduled some dates for 2021. Knock on wood that those happen. But those guys have had, as the central pieces, have had their on again, off again. But it looks like they are forging ahead. Here they are. I can't believe this. They're both like in their mid-70s and still touring and still doing things.
Yeah, Burton just turned 73, and Randy's 4 or 5 years older than him. But you're right. The tour last summer was it was a go. and ticket sales were incredible. It was really interesting to see the response in Canada and in the States. So hopefully they're able to do those again and later this year. Of course, in the times we live in now, we have no idea what's going to happen in the future. There's also a box set that was timed to be released with the tour, so that's been pushed back, of course, as well. But I think the title is the Backman Cummings Collection, and it's a 7 LP, 7 CD box set. So hopefully that'll still get released later this year.
Is that going to have Guess Who and solo stuff both?
It's got 5 Guess Who albums, which, again, Randy's not on all of them. Mm-hmm. And then it's got one album that's kind of a compilation, Burton solo stuff, and then one that's a Randy kind of mostly BTO, but I think it's got a couple of his solo songs as well.
It's amazing. Those guys are still, again, out there doing it, and that they had such longevity, and Randy in 2 bands, and they're both Canadian institutions, and those Guess Who songs, and the BTO songs for that matter, and even some of Burton's solo stuff is so loved yet to this day, and that speaks to their longevity, that they've lasted as long as they have, and people love what they do, and so I trust the book is doing well.
It's doing really well. I'm actually surprised. I thought this one was going to be more of a labor of love than Nazareth or Cheap Trick, because I didn't think there would be as much international interest in it. But I've been proven wrong. Sales in the States are great. There's been some European sales, not as much as Nazareth. But, the sales have been great. In fact, the book's already paid for itself for its operating costs within the first month, which definitely did not happen with the Nazareth or Cheap Trick books. I'm really happy about it, and it's just a great thing to get people talking about the Guess Who again. And, I think maybe people were waiting for a book like this more than I thought that they were.
Robert, if people want to find the book, they can get a copy from you directly. There's a number of other places. Let's direct them to those places. You
can get it off of the publisher's website, which is Friesen Press. Amazon has it as well, although Amazon's doing some weird things these days where they allow third-party sellers to list the book first. So it's really weird. So if you're on Amazon, just make sure you're looking at a copy of it that it says, shipped from Amazon. That's your best bet. And for anyone who wants signed copies, they can reach out to me through Facebook or through my website, thesideofthetracks.ca, and I can get either a paperback or a hardcover copy signed personally to them. And I'm shipping out practically 10 books a day, and have been for the last few weeks, so it's really great.
Awesome. So Nazareth, Cheap Trick, the Guess Who. Robert, what's next?
I don't know, Mark. There's definitely been a few ideas. Part of me doesn't think that there should be another book. It's a lot of work, and there's also a lot of nonsense, that a lot of hoops to jump through with managers and, ex-band members and stuff like that. That part of it's not fun, for sure. I didn't have that with the Nazareth book. Did have it with Cheap Trick, and I did have it with the Guess Who. So I don't enjoy that part of it. But getting the book into people's hands and people enjoying it, I really do appreciate that part of it. So not sure. My wife demands that there's a 4th book. She thinks I really need to keep doing this. So I guess I got to come up with something fast.
Robert, thank you so much, and congratulations on the book.
Thank you, Mark.
Robert Lawson, the author of Wheatfield Empire, The Listener's Guide to the Guess Who, our guest on the Skaar Kaard on 103.7 The Fox.